Well, obviously, when it comes to FCW, and a lot of what I know from it is from this documentary because I never watched it when it was actually taking place, there are probably a lot of similarities to OVW, but also a lot of differences, I would imagine.
Well, yes, and I'm not going to knock FCW, and I like Steve Kern, and I'm sure he worked his ass off on this. But John Laurinaitis is the key here. He was wanting to get rid of OVW because we wouldn't do everything he told us to do. And we'll get into this in more detail, but while they refused in those days to own the developmental territories because of insurance concerns or whatever reason they came up with, they wanted full say in everything that went on. And, Jim Ross, when he was the head of talent relations, his opinion was, if you can't follow their rules, you can't follow ours. We were running a promotion, a small territory, but a territory that had a training program. Whereas all Laurinaitis wanted was a training program and was not really concerned whether we did any outside business or did anything else otherwise and how it impacted the WWE. So therefore, he started trying to make his own. And the reason why they picked Florida was because that's where, when he wasn't in Connecticut, he wanted to live in Florida, and everybody else lived. Gerald Briscoe, a lot of the guys lived in Florida. It was more convenient. It was also insane to start a wrestling promotion in Florida, but they didn't start a wrestling promotion. So this is what I got to get over. They started a wrestling school, and that school served their purpose quite well, but it was never a legitimate wrestling promotion. And we'll talk about the differences. But as far as the documentary, they played a little bit with the timeline. FCW didn't just start right up after they took guys from OVW and Deep South. They were working on it for quite a while. They sent Steve Kern came up to fucking OVW for Danny Davis to tell him what he had done, which is why that the FCW setup, once they got, to their final location, looked exactly like OVW. It is exactly with the banners on the wall and the fucking converted warehouse that was customized for the offices and the training facility and to shoot the TV in. That was OVW. They sent Steve up to figure out what we were doing and how to copy that. Laurinaitis could not, he couldn't tell us what to do. I mean, it was ridiculous in some instances. Like I've told the story before, they didn't want cables for the ropes. They wanted real ropes. Well, real ropes don't work on a training ring. They stretch and they break and people get hurt, which happened as soon as they made OVW switch to ropes when I was gone. One time they sent us fucking 3 sets of ropes and a guy down to show us how to tie them. And then we fucking put all those in storage and kept using our cables that we liked and wanted to use on our fucking ring. But anyway, the reason why Florida would not work for a wrestling promotion is because, especially at that time, 2007, running wrestling in Florida to try to make money was death. TNA was running Orlando at Universal Studios and giving away all the tickets for free. You could see Kurt Angle and Sting and every big star in the world for free. Every other little independent in Florida was running around the whole state and drawing 100 people or 200 people. Now then, when FCW went, there was another fucking wrestling promotion. Florida was known as a place you either 100 people went to a little independent show or you got into the big shows free. And Florida also was a harder TV market to break into. That's why they spent very little time in this documentary on the FCW TV show. One of the things they glossed over was, unless I'm mistaken, and somebody can certainly fucking chime in if I am, they never actually got on a broadcast station anywhere in the state of Florida. They were on a sports network because you couldn't crack into broadcast TV in Tampa, Orlando, Miami. Those are major markets. So they couldn't get broadcast TV. They also didn't have any mid-size arenas that they could run, like we had the Louisville Gardens, and then later on when they closed the Gardens, Six Flags. It was dead. Florida was dead for wrestling. So it would just be a school running shows, but no big crowds, no major events to build your television to. They wouldn't exist. And that was fine with them. They didn't want a lot of guys. I found out later on they didn't want, I found out some while we were running it, they didn't want people to see the guys in developmental at all. And now NXT is the best fucking television show. The developmental is the best show. But anyway, that's the thing of having the bunch of rings in the building. Laurinaitis was hell-bent on that. Have 3 rings. No. Why not? Because it's confusing. We have one trainer holding one class in one ring, and everybody gets a chance to participate, and everybody that's not participating at that specific time gets a chance to watch and pay attention. When you got 3 rings in a warehouse, all you've got is a bunch of ring noise and people taking bumps and boom, 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 and one group's over here learning something, the other group's over there learning something. It's fucking distracting. And Danny Davis told him that. We're not going to have multiple rings. We're going to have one ring. This is what we're going to do. This is the way we do it. He couldn't stand it. So that's why Laurinaitis basically went around looking for a way to start an OVW without actually having to fucking deal with OVW. And they made poor Kern put his name on everything to be responsible financially and liable legally, just like poor old Danny Davis, because they refused to own it. As a matter of fact, one time right before one of my last blow up, Danny Davis had got so mad, he even said, look, I can come up with a price. You can own this whole thing, and you can be in charge of everything and tell us what to do, because everything they wanted us to do was contrary to our good business in Louisville. They would call me up every Wednesday at TV and say, well, put so-and-so on TV. It's not ready to be on TV. I'll tape something that you can see. Oh, we want to see it on TV. Well, I'm not going to put somebody that's not ready to be in front of people on my television show because my fucking face is on it and my name's on it. And this is my hometown. The process was when they came to the program, whether they were signed or unsigned, they started in class. Rip Rogers ran the class. They hated Rip because he'd tell people the truth. Say you're fucking rotten. And he cussed a lot. And he wasn't politically correct. But he was a great trainer because he'd been through everything. And he would tell the guys, now look, you shouldn't do this. You're not supposed to do this. This makes no sense to do this, but this is the way they want you to do it. So do it that way because they're paying you. But he was too honest. So they hated that. But Rip ran the classes. Danny ran the business. And I booked and announced. And I would see the guys in class, and I'd get Rip and Danny's recommendation. Then I'd put them on live events, not televised, and I'd see how they looked, and I'd see if I got some ideas from them. And then, or if they were ready, then I would put them on television. And I was as particular about my television, even more so than everything else that I do. So only the best fucking guys made it in the best spots, whether they had contracts or not. That's another thing they didn't like. They wanted us to push all the contract guys. I kept saying, well, unfortunately, some of the guys that you have signed suck, and some of the guys we've found are really good, so I'm featuring the guys that are outperforming the other guys. Your contract guys need to catch up and work harder. They didn't like that. So for a variety of reasons, they had to get away from it. And that's what Danny at one point, especially with the Orton fiasco, when we had Randy Orton booked for Six Flags 3 months in advance. And it was one of our biggest client. They paid us as much for the summer shows as fucking the WWE paid all year to OVW directly. And then they told us after we'd already done the TV, well, Randy's got a non-refundable family vacation. He can't come. Well, I got this fucking email from Laurinaitis 3 months ago, said he was booked and approved. And Laurinaitis said, oh, he must have forgot. Well, then Tommy Dreamer called up and stooged Laurinaitis, said, actually, John forgot to tell him. That's why he's got the vacation. That was a couple weeks for my final blow up and was one of the main reasons for it. But, you know, they were constantly trying to monkey with what we were doing and constantly trying to tell us what to do with our own company. They wouldn't buy the fucking thing. And then one of the last ditch efforts, me and Danny both went to Laurinaitis over the phone and said, look, if you give us a raise from what we're making now from X to Y, whatever it was, then we'll just do whatever the fuck you want us to do. And I meant it because I was so tired of fighting and arguing with them. I said, all right, since we're going to lose a lot of revenue on ticket sales or on whatever the fuck from dumbing this goddamn thing down, which is actually what did happen as soon as I was gone. The booking went south. First, Heyman didn't want to do it, and then Al Snow tried to do it. And I think they had Dreamer in there, botched it up a while. I love you, Tommy, but you're a shitty booker. The money went down. Our money went down. Everything went down because Danny was the last one to be able to argue. So he just started holding him up for more money because he saw the end was near and they were going to fuck him eventually. So the last year and a half, he held him up for a bunch more money because they had no other fucking, thing to do. But we said, we'll do whatever the fuck you want. You give us this raise and it's yours. We'll just do whatever. You know what Laurinaitis did? He came back and gave us a raise that was $250 a week less than what we'd asked for. To save $200, I said, okay. In that case, then you motherfucker, you can't just give us the price we asked for to do whatever the fuck you want and fuck the rest of our business. So fuck you. I'm going to do whatever the fuck I want and take this money as long as possible. And he even had a contract written up that had a clause in it saying Jim Cornette will give first. How the fuck did they phrase it? I'll have to go back and get that contract and make copies of it. Maybe sell it on the fucking website. But Jim Cornette will give first priority to any WWE affiliated or related business or anything we want to do. He'll give that his first priority. And he put that on paper. And of course I signed it and didn't mean a goddamn word of it because they lied to us. So I was going to lie to them. But anyway, there are all these problems. So with Florida, they started it and made it in Laurinaitis's dream image of a wrestling school. They hired a bunch of great people to do it. Dr. Tom had already been training since the start. He's the guy that trained fucking The Rock in the studio and in the warehouse in Stamford and all those other guys. And so naturally, Doc was a no-brainer. And Dr. Tom's a guy that got significant airtime in this as far as people saying, oh, he was the greatest and blah, blah, blah. And he taught me so much. Guess who's not there anymore? Dr. Tom Pritchard. So they made a baby face out of a guy that they fired unceremoniously. Did I ever tell the story why they fired Tom Pritchard from the program?
I'm not sure.
They got some guy, and I don't know that I've ever met him yet. Maybe I met him at the Hall of Fame and it went right by me or whatever, but they got a guy from, I think was he in volleyball, professional volleyball, or is that some woman that they had hired or whatever? Anyway, they got some fucking guy that supposedly had some other sports background in administrating sports named Canyon Seaman. Ceman, but Seaman. You can imagine a guy named Seaman in a wrestling locker room, right? That was fucking beautiful right there.
And you were right. He's a retired beach volleyball player.
There you go. Retired beach volleyball player. He came in his first week and gave all the developmental talent down there a big speech. And as is normal, somebody coming in from outside the business has no idea about anything about wrestling. He came off like he, A, didn't know anything about wrestling, and B, like he was a know-it-all. The quote was a flaming fucking asshole. So Tom, not wanting this guy to get off on the wrong foot, called him in the back, just the two of them, and said, I know you're new, Canyon, but I want to make you aware so that you can do something about it, that you came off to all those guys like an asshole. And he was starting to say, and here's why, and the guy just said, well, I guess we're going to have to agree to disagree. Instead of saying, oh shit, I did. What the fuck did I do? You know more about this than I do. You've been doing this for 30 years. You know these guys. I'm in a new job. What the fuck? What should I have said? Or where have I gone wrong? He's, well, we're going to agree to disagree. And shortly after that, Dr. Tom was fired because they value people from these real sports with these real degrees more than they do the people that actually know how to do this shit. And that's, like I said, they didn't like Rip Rogers because he was honest with the guys. They didn't like Dr. Tom because he was honest with the office employees. Laurinaitis told me one time, you're yelling at the guys. You think? Yes, I'm yelling at them. I'm a fucking football coach. Well, no, Jim, you need to empower them because that was a word he had gotten from Vince. You need to empower them and uplift them. No, I need to tell them if they're fucking up that they're fucking up because they're fucking up my business and they're fucking up the wrestling business. And if they don't want to fuck up the business and they want to get a goddamn job, they need to hear about it. And I don't have time with everything else that I'm doing to fucking pussyfoot around and say, oh, please don't fuck shit up. You fucking lunatic. Here's what you did and here's why. Don't do this anymore. That's the end of it. As long as you don't do it anymore, you've learned something. Didn't mean I wanted to sodomize their mothers and send their whole family to a gas chamber just because I was yelling at them. But there's a lot of yelling going on in wrestling because as I've mentioned, sometimes shit is done on the fly. You yell when TV is going on. You yell when a live event is going on. You don't have to yell in wrestling school class unless somebody almost kills somebody. Then you yell at them because there's no pressure there. But that was not my thing. The class was Rips, and the class was Dr. Tom's, and the class was other guys that would come to OVW to fucking help train people. As a matter, when Dr. Tom would come to Louisville because he'd known Danny Davis for 25 years, instead of getting a hotel room and sitting in a hotel room all by himself, he'd stay at Danny's house. Danny had a big place with plenty of fucking room. Laurinaitis told him, don't stay at Danny Davis's anymore. You're getting too friendly with them. Like, we're not all working for the same fucking people, right? You're too friendly with them. Because it was always a thing with Laurinaitis where he always wanted to take this thing over once he got that job, and he just couldn't do it right. And he still couldn't do it right. Anyway, this documentary, outside of the similarities to OVW, I noticed the guys, they had so many tryout promo and promo class clips where they were actually shooting this shit. If the office wanted to see somebody cut a promo, we would tape them cutting a promo and send it up to them. But I always said, guys do promos on TV, guys do promos at live events, guys do pre-tape promos before TV in the fucking locker room. When the shit's going out and going to be seen by somebody, you're on. And that's when you say what you would say if you were put, really and truly put in the position that you were purported to be in on the program. These guys are just practicing characters. That's not, they kept saying the word character and entertainment. If anybody said character in OVW, I would scream at them and say, if you want to call it a gimmick, it's a gimmick, but it's you from now on. If it's your gimmick, the gimmick becomes you. You're not playing a part. You're not playing a character. They use the word entertainment, even in their promos down there. I mean, Roman Reigns said, I'm going to be the greatest in all of entertainment or whatever. The fuck you. The first motherfucker that said entertainment about the wrestling business would never be on my television again. That's why we trained wrestlers and they trained sports entertainers, and that's what they wanted. The Bellas talking about training for wrestling and how hard it was gives me gas to begin with. But they had a segment on the guys coming up with their names. Coming up with their names. What should their names? We sent in a list of 30 or 40 names. Either use the guy's real name, especially if he's been in the business before and been using it. If he's been in the business before and he had a gimmick, use that gimmick, because you know they're going to change it anyway once they get up there. Or come up with a specific gimmick and a name. You know, for a guy whose name was fucking Chauncey Blubbershit, you don't want to fucking put that on the goddamn program. So, okay, what? You got an idea, or elsewise I'll come up with something for you. But there wasn't like lists of 30 and 40 fucking names. It just, I don't want to be negative on all this whole documentary, but they were training sports entertainers, not wrestlers. They weren't getting guys ready to be in the wrestling business at all. If they didn't make it in the WWE, they didn't give a shit. They didn't care whether the guy went on to anywhere else or not, or was prepared to do anything else. It was WWE way, and that's it. We were training wrestlers that could go anywhere. That's why so many of them did.
What did you think of the one guy they had? I think it may have been during a promo class segment where he kept coming up with different gimmicks, but he did the same promo.
Yeah,
I forget what his name was. Yeah.
And so did everybody else, because you never saw him on TV for that reason. You know, that the promo class stuff, we would do those with training school seminars or with where guys would come in for tryouts. Did it in Ring of Honor, did it in OVW, a variety of places where you give a guy a 1-minute promo. Tell me about yourself or promo this match that you're about to have, this practice match with this other guy. Just so you could see if they could hit a minute, which almost nobody could. They just peter out at 46 seconds and just stand there and look. Or they would already have some memorized promo of some character that they wanted to play in their minds, and they would it'd be if I said you're going to have a match with Jim Cornette, the big 6'10" black guy in the corner, or Brian Last, the 5'8" fucking skinny little heel in the corner, or whatever. They'd use the same promo and just interchange names. That's what guys that would come, because even the guys in seminars and tryouts like that, even a Ring of Honor, whatever, they thought they were supposed to be playing a part. One guy in a Ring of Honor tryout actually started his promo that he was a space alien and he had landed on Earth from whatever the fuck. And after 15 seconds, I said, whoa. I said, go outside, go to the back of the promo line, and when you come back in this room, you're a fucking earthling. I don't know whatever happened to that guy. But anyway.
He ended up training Chris Statlander.
Well, there you go. And I would critique guys' promos, whether they did them in OVW for television or for the live events or, in these seminars, but practicing in an empty building, coming up with different lines for a character is just goofy. Nobody ever told me, come up with a character. They said, here, you're a rich kid. You're a rich kid. Your mother bought your way into the business. What would you say in that situation? Okay, I'll take it from there. I'll practice my promos in the hotel rooms, in the car. I'll come up with shit to say. I'll get it over. They talk about Dusty Rhodes being the promo king, and he was running the promo classes. And even several of them said we would say whatever. And he kept saying, but who are you? Tell me about yourself. Why do I care? He wanted them to talk about themselves and be real and be from the heart while they're trying to do all this fucking horseshit emoting. And, some of them got it and some of them didn't, apparently. But, that's the thing is Dusty was saying, you be you, baby. And then somebody would talk about their character. All the clips of the funny characters and the funny outfits. I don't know what that guys were wearing fake mustaches and doing all that. That's another exercise they used to have. That's why Paul Heyman flunked his first tryout for the WWF. Back in, my God, it would have been
89
right before he came to the WWF or to WCW rather.
Oh, I was thinking it was after Flair sent him home in the spring of 89.
No, I thought it was.
I thought it was before. 89.
Well, it may have been, but yeah, the fucking ponytail and the fucking grabbing it thing and the fucking they used to, in the WWF, they would have guys come in, whether it be announcers or wrestlers or whatever, and they wouldn't let them cut promos or act like a wrestling announcer. They would have them do exercises where they would hand somebody a light bulb and they'd say, sell me this light bulb. And then they'd turn the camera on and you're supposed to sell them the light bulb. Because that was supposed to see whether you were quick and could think on your feet and you were glib and whatever. It was fucking stupid. It was like an acting class fucking exercise. And with Heyman, since he had that ponytail back then, they had him doing some kind of thing where he grabbed his fucking ponytail and held it up over his head and was supposed to go woo, woo, a lot or whatever. And he was like, what the fuck is this? I heard the whole story was goddamn insane, but that was 25 years ago. But anyway, they did the clips of the guys, funny characters and funny outfits. We never did that. If it didn't lead to something we could do on television to get a guy over and sell a fucking ticket, it would not happen. I didn't have guys do in-character promos. I put them in specific situations. I gave them ideas of what they would say if they were really in that situation. And I said, put that in your own words. And that's it. You can't teach somebody how to fucking be an interesting speaker. They either are or they aren't. It comes out eventually or it doesn't. As a matter of fact, Bray Wyatt, obviously, on this documentary was 2 levels above all the other guys in the whole fucking place doing promos, even then. Because he had the Blackjack Mulligan genes, I guess. But, one time somebody told me while Dusty was down there one day, he was just shaking his head. He said, Vince better be glad I never saved my money. But I can imagine he had to go out of his mind. Because when I worked with Dusty, he didn't critique your promos. He told me, don't talk about the Challenger Kid. But he didn't critique promos because everybody was working for him either already knew how to do promos as themselves, or he just didn't let them talk on TV. But so they stole the ring crew idea from OVW, where the guys put the ring up and took it down, although I don't know whether they didn't specify this, but our rule was the heels put the ring up and the baby faces take it down, or vice versa. Heels and baby faces were never allowed to mingle in front of the people. Yes, you would go and you would see the stars of the show putting the ring up because it was a training promotion, but you wouldn't see the heels and the baby faces putting the ring up together and then going out and wrestling. That didn't happen. And a lot of times, whose ever turn it was to be last afterwards was hot at the other group because they could get out early. They talked about making the guys poster the towns. We never did that because we actually had local sponsors for our spot shows. And the local sponsors were supposed to poster the town. Whether they did it well or not all the time was subject to debate. But that was another thing when I was looking at some of their schedules. These guys in Florida, they couldn't. It's not set up the same in Orlando and in Tampa and in Middle Florida as the Louisville area was. We ran 150 live events a year with television tapings, practice shows, Six Flags, whatever the case, and never went farther than 120 miles from Louisville, Kentucky. Those guys were going to these fucking dipshit National Guard armories in Florida in the middle of nowhere, a ways away from fucking Tampa, and having to poster the towns and then come back and then go back down to wrestle them. So that was probably tough. They spent very little time talking about the FCW TV, and it looked good. The clips that I saw, it looked like, because they spent money and they got equipment down there because they were opened up to spend money at that point because Laurinaitis had to make it work. It was his idea. But they didn't say really anything about that. They didn't show any. They just showed a few clips. They didn't show any great matches or highlights. And to be honest, that started me thinking, do you ever remember a great FCW television show like you remember great OVW TV shows? Do you remember any major FCW events like the Rock and Rumble or the fucking Christmas Chaos or the any of the big events, the Six Flags events that we ran in OVW, or the Last Dance where we closed the gardens down? No, because they didn't have any. Because they were put in a position where they were at a place where they could not draw big crowds and they didn't have any buildings they could afford. And I mentioned the WWE didn't want the TV to be seen. They got upset at us a bunch when we got a VHS deal one time. It's going to be like $750 a month to sell our VHSs of the shows. Oh, we don't want you to do that. We don't, because it was with Feinstein. We don't like Rob Feinstein. Well, we like it $750 a month. So they started paying us $750 a month not to sell our VHSs to Rob Feinstein.
I'll agree with them on that.
Well, I was running a business though. Then we got a deal to get on one of the satellite networks. Like Bill Barron's got Smoky Mountain on America One or whatever. They didn't want that. They didn't want people to see it. I said, well, we can get this revenue. So they started paying us a little more not to do this deal. And finally, I got a foreign TV deal that it would have panned out in the short run. It didn't last in the long term. The people involved in it didn't last in the long term, but we could have made several $1,000s at minimum. And they didn't want us to do that, but they wouldn't pay us the fucking money they were telling us to turn down. So that's what I got. That was one of the times I got hot. And that was after JR was already weaning his way out of it, so he couldn't really intervene. But they would actually pay us not to take money from other people on shit that didn't matter, didn't make any difference to them. But the FCW did the weekly TV tapings, $5 tickets. Kern's family ran the concessions, just like Danny's wife, Julie, ran the concessions. I noticed that the WWE was putting their copyright on because they did show a close of the FCW TV show, and it said copyright FCW and WWE. Diver explained the story of how that they tried to tell us they owned our TV show, and we told them they didn't.
I don't think so.
Well, when things were getting really sideways, and we had, I believe the way it came up was we had another offer to do something else with our TV show after we got in the new Davis Arena and the TV started really looking good, not the old building. The old building looked like shit. But the new arena that Al Snow and OVW is still in today, they've done almost 1,100 television shows since 1993 when Danny started it. That one looked good, and the TV started looking better, and we had some deal, and that's when Laura and I just said, well, you know we own the TV. Me and Danny both said, what? Yeah, look at the original contract. I said, we have. Doesn't say anything about our TV show. Since we were the first developmental program, because we invented it, we had the idea, and I had the idea. I sold Jim Ross on it. He sold Vince on it, and I moved to Louisville. That was my escape. They had never written a contract for a developmental territory. So the verbiage that they put in was that they would own the videotapes of all their contracted talent. I said, all right, then we'll be glad to send you the videotapes of all your contracted talent. But since the television show contains non-contract talent, both wrestlers, referees, announcers, Dean Hill, and all sorts of people like that, then you'll have to either give all those people contracts or elsewise you'll have to buy our fucking television library. So they did. They bought the fucking TV library to clear that little obstacle up, which at that point was about 5 years of television. So it was a nice little low six-figure sum. But they tried to fucking act like that they owned OVW television. And Danny said, I never agreed to sign my television show that I was running for fucking 6 years before you people showed up away to you. But anyway, so they kept the rights of Florida Championship Wrestling. John Laurinaitis told another story. Our job was to develop talent as fast as we could and get them on television. That was another problem. They were sending guys saying in 3 months, well, what about so-and-so? Yeah, we've talked about all, especially all the young guys that they signed that were 18, 19. We'd say they'll be all right. Couple of years, maybe they're legally able to vote. Oh no, we got to move these guys along. What the fuck? You think you're going to train a fucking wrestler to wrestle in the WWF, the biggest promotion in the world, in 6 fucking months? What kind of idiot are you? We found out what kind of idiot he was. That began the fucking the phase they went through of bringing up guys that were completely and totally unprepared for what they were doing because they rushed them through the thing. I was fine with them having multiple developmental territories. They fucked Les Thatcher around in Cincinnati, but that was early on. He never really got a chance to get a great facility and get going, and they gave him all the WCW rejects that they didn't want to begin with. Deep South was a fiasco. It got universally panned because it was just a goddamn lunatic asylum. You know, it just was run like a shit show, and they couldn't get on TV in Atlanta either. It's just that's where Jody Hamilton lived, and Jody tried, but it just didn't work. But I had encouraged them to get developmental programs in different parts of the country. So you could send one to Louisville for 6 months, then to Florida for 6 months, then to fucking Kansas City or wherever for 6 months. And in a couple of years, you'd have a guy that's really polished, that had been able to go from prelims to main events, had been a babyface and a heel, had done different angles to know how they worked, gotten their timing. That's the way you train guys to be wrestlers. You don't go from a fucking schoolyard basketball game on the playground to the NBA. There's got to be in between. That's why they worked all the guys in FCW like they were all on the same level. I brought guys in and started them out in the opening matches and let them mature and develop in front of the people and let them get over with the people and move them up the cards. That way, when they took our main event guys, then the theory was we'd have guys ready to go in the main events. The problem was, for a while there, thanks to Laurinaitis, they were taking all of our middle card guys and not the guys that could really fucking go, the Bashams, the Dinsmores, the Conways, the Novas, the fucking on and on and on, the Jeters, Mark Magnus, all those guys. They would take the guys that Laurinaitis felt reminded him of himself, like fucking Mark Jindrak, who had no body, no personality, 2 left feet, but he was big and tall. Or Sean O'Hare, there was a discipline problem, looked great, but couldn't talk and couldn't fucking work and loved to get in bar fights and cause trouble with cops. So that was telling on the documentary. Said we wanted to get him as fast as we could because that made him look better in the office when he could tell Vince, oh yeah, we got 6 more up. Well, the 6 more wasn't ready. Seth Rollins, Tyler Black talked about not getting called up when he was clearly better than everybody else down there, and he was frustrated. And they made it in this sound like it was his fault. I'd talked to Tom while he was still down there. So what the fuck? Why is Tyler Black still in developmental when he's better than half the guys on the main roster? He said he won't quit doing what they don't want him to do. And it was all the little things that, you know, you can imagine that a guy who's had a wrestling background would do that they didn't want in sports entertainment. And so once he started doing those things, then they brought him up, but they, you know, they just had to have it. Oh, we got to wipe the wrestler off of him. But Kern worked his ass off and he knew how the wrestling business worked. He was glad to have that chance to do something like that and run a school for the WWE. I never intended to only be a school for the WWE. I intended OVW to be what it was, a local promotion that drew big crowds for its big events and drew small crowds for its training events and medium-sized crowds. We might have 62 people on Tuesday night at St. Therese Gym in downtown Louisville for a practice show where nobody still ever broke character and nobody still ever fucking did the same thing twice. And we'd have 200 or 300 or maybe 500 for a high school gym spot show, and we'd have 1,000 or 2,000, depending on our attraction for Six Flags. And we, as I've mentioned, for the 3 big events at the Gardens before they closed it, we sold 12,000 tickets for 3 events, grossed $150,000. We had an opportunity to get on broadcast television, which they couldn't do. I wanted OVW to provide a training service for the WWE and make extra money that way and get these guys ready for the big leagues. But also we were running our own promotion and profiting or not profiting based on that. They spend more money now on one developmental guy's contract than they had wrapped up in OVW for a year. We made all the rest of our money through partnering with Clear Channel Radio for the big events and co-promotion with Six Flags and sponsors, large and small, from the satellite store to the, you know, local yokel fucking furniture shop and the pizza place. So the FCW, and it was a good program, but they tried to stretch this out to 1 hour and 20 minutes with a lot of talking heads, but it was a wrestling school that ran shows in armories in front of a few people. They didn't do major TV specials. They didn't draw big crowds. They couldn't run big buildings to draw the big crowds. And I don't know, truthfully, what their record crowd was, but I never heard of them drawing anything over 500 people. Did you?
No.
So for what they wanted, good or bad or indifferent, is what they got. But this was not a wrestling promotion. It was a school that ran shows. And that's what they wanted. And that's what I did not want OVW to just be that. And that's why we couldn't get along. You know, JR was fine, but once Laurinaitis came along, but then in poetic justice, here comes the son-in-law who wants to take it all over and shuts that shit down. And now they've got tens of millions of dollars to spend on a wrestling school, and their fucking performance center has a kitchen. So the same poetic justice, the same thing happened to Laurinaitis as he did to us. He shut it down to recreate it in his own image, and then Triple H did the same thing to him. And now they make no bones about even being a training promotion. They're the next promotion. You see what I did there? Next. So I don't mean to piss and moan about this show. As a documentary on a wrestling school, it was great. It's just they had more footage and they can take more credit for this because they own everything. But it was basically OVW light with the ideas that some of the good ideas that we had about how to run a wrestling school, and none of the good ideas that we had about how to run a promotion.
It's impossible to watch that thing and not go, why isn't Tom Pritchard there?
Well, yeah, because he's a fucking wrestler that told other wrestlers the truth and told other office people the truth and not being a prick about it, trying to help them. Canyon Seaman, Oprah, Uma, Seaman.
Do you end up feeling bad for Steve Keirn, the way things ended up watching that?
Well, yeah, kind of, but not really, because, he wasn't running a promotion beforehand, and he didn't run a promotion afterwards, and he never had to move out of his hometown. I felt worse for Danny when they fucked him, and I've told that story before. He knew it was coming after they ran me off, and that's why I said, he asked me one time, when Laurinaitis would make these calls on Wednesdays, he said, they're trying to run you off, right? I said, apparently, because Laurinaitis knew if he fucking pushed me long enough, I'd blow up, and I did. And then he thought he'd have a better chance of getting Danny to do what he wanted him to do. But then once that I was gone and fucking OVW's bottom line was not looking as good as it did because the ticket sales went down and the booking wasn't as good and the TV was ratings, blah, 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 the whole 9 yards, he started jacking more money out of them because now he's got to run this fucking lunatic asylum practically by himself with only outside help that he can't trust because they all work for the WWE first and foremost, and he can't even have his old friend Tom Pritchard stay at his house. So that's when Laurinaitis started trying to figure out a way I can't take this thing over, so I'll just do my own with somebody that'll be more complacent about it. So, yeah, Steve did it, and Steve should have known. You do everything that, you try to do everything that makes any sense that they ask you to do. And the most important part was we turned out the biggest money stars that they fucking had in the last 20 years. And everybody that came from OVW could work. And everybody that came from OVW could talk and could hit TV cues and knew how to work television. And everybody that came from OVW had been in front of crowds of 60 people, 100 people, 500 people, 1,000 people, 4,000 people, whatever the fuck. Everybody was prepared. That's why some guys, when they didn't make it in WWE, they just went on somewhere else. And they've been all over all these promotions because we tried to train well-rounded wrestlers. Keirn could do that, and he worked his ass off to do it, but he should have known that ultimately they were going to fuck him too because they fucked us. It's like when Brian Lee was the Underfaker. And he went to Vince and he said, I could start anytime full-time, Vince. And Vince said, aren't you working for Cornette down in Smoky Mountain? Yeah, but I can start anytime. So what's the first thing that happened? Vince came to me and said, hey, Brian Lee says he can start at any time. I just wanted you to know that. I'm not going to take him until you tell me you're finished with him. But I just wanted you to know that because I figure if he'll do it to you, he'll do it to me when he gets a better offer from somebody else. So Brian Lee may not even have known this, but I told Vince, I said, you know what? Since he said that, you can have him anytime you want him because I've had him for way too long anyway. And then Vince didn't want him after the Underfaker thing fell apart, and I had to take him back and worm him back into the fucking cards. But Keirn should have known because if they fucked us, they're going to fuck him. The point was that we had turned out guys that knew what the fuck they were doing, and we had an unparalleled record at it by doing it the way that we did it. And the only person that ever complained was the one that turned out to be the best friends with the fucking son-in-law, the fucking overaged, injury-prone, non-personality fucking mug that I made the Demon of the Deep Leviathan. And Brock Lesnar, who just wanted to go back to Minnesota. That's the only two that ever complained. And even Brock was still close with Danny Davis as of a couple of years ago. Came by and visited him.
You know, you bring that up. OVW obviously turned out a generation of stars from Cena down to Lesnar. FCW, from watching this documentary.
And also, can you imagine if they'd actually used the guys that we trained that were actually better performers than some of the ones they used, instead of fucking burying them with bad booking or just fucking running them off?
Used is right. They used them. They used them up.
Yeah.
FCW, clearly from watching this, although some people had an independent pedigree beforehand, a lot of the top stars of today went through the FCW program. Charlotte, Seth Rollins, Jon Moxley, Roman Reigns, Bray Wyatt.
Dr. Tom.
Well, Dr. Tom was the trainer, yeah. But what's the record of NXT in terms of NXT actually developing new stars? Not the people that were in NXT that came from FCW, that came from Dr. Tom and Steve Kern.
Not a fair question to ask me, because I've only been watching NXT since we started this little fucking review fiasco. So I don't know the answer to that question.
Like, you can't give NXT credit for Adam Cole and Roderick Strong, right?
Well, of course not. The fuck? No, from scratch? I don't know from scratch. They keep trying to go for football players and these supposed real sports athletes, and they bring them and show them this big-time performance center and tell them they're going to pay them to train, and just on the theory they might be good. So who's going to turn that down, even if you don't give a shit about being a wrestler? Well, I'll take a fling at this and see. When you had places that were rooted in the wrestling business, they don't need to be fucking air-conditioned. They don't need to be, we talked about the Big Show bucket when they sent the Big Show down to the old Davis Arena in Jeffersonville to lose some weight and get in shape. We gave him his own puke bucket, because in the summertime when he was having to hit the ropes, he'd have to stop and go outside and puke and then come back in and do it again. Then he hit the ropes so hard he bent the fucking ring posts, so they bought us a new ring. But it can't be, we're going to cater to you. We're going to give you enough money to live on and pay all your bills and have no financial worries while you train to do something that you may or may not be any good at in this beautiful facility. No, you need to get in the back of the fucking car and drive to the goddamn National Guard Armory. That was FCW. That was wrestling. You need to work in a hot building. You need to train in a fucking hot building or a cold building. You need to get the idea of what the wrestling business is, and you need to want to be good at it and want to stay in it and want to excel, or we're all just wasting our time. And they, early on in OVW, they signed a couple of guys. What was that? Stephen Gamblin. He had been an NFL player of some description, and he was 6'7" and 325 pounds. And goddamn, he didn't last long. And boy, you should have seen also. I'll tell this story. Goddamn it, I might as well. Danny won't get mad at me. Danny Davis had an adult daughter. She was over the age of consent of 18, but he didn't like her going out with the wrestlers for obvious reasons. Well, this fucking big Stephen Gamblin character hadn't been here 6 weeks, and he takes Danny Davis's daughter out on a date and keeps her out late enough that eyebrows were raised. Even though she was an adult, I believe at the time she was living with Danny. And the next day at fucking TV, Stephen pulls up, and a lot of these guys, I think Russ McCullough came here in some kind of fucking Hummer. That Achim Albrecht Brackus, he had a nice car. The guys that they would sign to developmental contracts had been other places. They had these big cars, and here the real wrestlers are coming up in shit you had to fucking fix with super glue and a rubber band, right? Stephen Gamblin pulls up and gets out of his car, and somebody alerted Danny was there. And Danny came out back, and Danny 5'6" and 210 pounds then stuck his finger in that 6'7" monster's face and said, "Motherfucker, you keep my daughter out to whatever fucking time it was again, I will pull your eyeballs out and skull fuck you in front of all the rest of these motherfuckers. Give me a try if you don't think I will." And old Stefan gulped and stood there and took his tongue lashing, and he got cussed until Danny got tired of it. And what would have happened if he had not taken that tongue lashing was that Danny would have pulled his fucking eyeballs out and skull fucked him. Because here you had a guy that actually trained on Herb Welch's farm. Danny Davis trained and broke into business, and he's been on the show, and you can go back in the archives or on YouTube. I'm sure it's there somewhere. He was trained by one of the guys that invented the fucking Southern wrestling business, that fought in carnivals, was a salty old fucking shooter. And this fucking football player would have had his testicles in his fucking ears before he knew it. And he knew that. He knew enough about Danny's reputation to know that that's what would happen, which is why he took his tongue lashing. But you went from guys who were literally trained by the first generation of pros that came from carnivals to guys that are being trained that they're actors and entertainers and not pro wrestlers and even pro athletes in a goddamn 10-year span. And that's why all the guys now, sometimes you can't fault them, even though I do. The guys that are in the wrestling business now think that this, what they see now, this is what it's always been and the way it's supposed to be. Or that somehow it used to be horrible, but now it's so much better. Because they don't know any different. Because especially the WWE and everybody involved with it has tried to build a wall around its current talent and anything that could rub off on them from the real wrestling business. And it's that's why it's a lost art.
You think we'll ever see an OVW documentary on the WWE network?
I doubt it. Well, for one thing, they own the TVs. They owned the TVs during the period of time that OVW had a developmental program with them, which was 99 through 07. And you'll probably never see anything more than clips. Even that was, by the way, I think everybody knows this, and I think you'll concur with it. That's the best booking I ever did. My OVW booking was so far above what I did in Smoky Mountain. In Smoky Mountain, I had veterans that could take matters in their own hands. But in OVW, my booking was 3 times better than anything else I've ever done anywhere else. And that's what kept me going. When I would want to quit the WWE, which I did on a number of occasions, especially the last year and a half, I couldn't figure out a way to quit the WWE without quitting OVW because we had gotten so entangled. And that's why they couldn't figure out a way to get out of OVW until they just made their own from scratch because they were too entangled. So it was a very abusive relationship. But I don't know what they could come up with to use as visual support like they do, because FCW, apparently they had a camera on everything. The wrestling school classes, Danny would turn the hard camera on and let it run and put it on VHS while a class was going on, saying if they wanted to see it at the office, he could send it to them. Most time, the office didn't know what the fuck we were doing. They got mad at Bruce one time, and he didn't have enough to do, so they had him. They said, okay, your task is to watch the OVW TV each week and give us a report on it and see who's ready to come up. Well, of course, he didn't want to, so he'd write a line or two. I saw a couple of them. We're not supposed to, but I saw a couple of them. He'd write a line or two about each match or segment without going into any detail, not talking about this guy's a better heel than a babyface, or this guy seems to be picking it up, talking, or whatever, anything instructive. He would generally say something that he thought that I'm pretty sure Laurinaitis would agree with. Either that or he just demented like Laurinaitis was, because he'd say stupid shit about the best talent we had and then praise the guys they were going to bring up anyway. And he couldn't get the idea that we were not following strict WWE protocol. Well, on our show, JR is only an announcer. But in OVW, he's presented as someone of authority in the WWE. That's because the WWE was saying publicly that he was vice president of talent relations. So when we would have him come down and make appearances, it was generally to reward one of our top wrestlers, whether they already had a developmental contract or not. We didn't want to just say that 30 of these guys have a contract. We wanted to make it special. So we would have JR come down sometimes and actually announce that they were signing them to a contract to move them to the next level or to make a different match or to whatever the fuck. And that's why I made Laurinaitis. The only time Laurinaitis as a performer has ever had heat in his life as a heel, had plenty of heat as one of the dynamic dudes. People hated him. But as a heel, the only time he's ever had heat as a performer was when to figure out some reason to explain to the fans why all their favorite wrestlers would go to the main roster and be made to look like idiots, Nick Dinsmore or Matt Morgan or whatever. I said it was the evil John Laurinaitis that's now working against our beloved Jim Ross in the office. And I even said one time, I said, Doug Basham, Machine, had sent his cohort Nikita up to engage in a dalliance with John Laurinaitis, which is why that they were persecuting the Damager and calling him Danny Basham. So basically, Nikita fucked John Laurinaitis to get ahead. And Laurinaitis had no idea this shit was going on. So he says, he comes down for our 2-hour special. We did a 2-hour primetime special on the WB affiliate here leading up to one of our big events. And I said, John, would you mind having a short tag match with you and Luther Reigns, who they sent, poor fella. He's had health issues since then. But we called him Laurinaitis' Inspector Impact. That was kind of a little play on words, too. That he was going to come down and make sure that Laurinaitis' bidding was going to be followed. So I put Laurinaitis and Inspector Impact in a tag match with two of our baby faces. Laurinaitis says, I don't have trunks anymore. I said, just come out in fucking sweats. It doesn't matter. Just you'll be in it. He came out. The people fucking booed. They threw shit at him. They were cussing him. They hated him because he was the reason why all their favorite wrestlers on OVW TV would be sent to Raw or SmackDown and look like fucking idiots and be made fun of. Johnny Jeter and Mike Mondo, all those guys. He had fucking heat. I could get anybody over at that point. We had the people in Louisville educated to our product and our style. They knew all the fucking guys. They knew their backstories. They knew who they were mad at. They knew who they were friends with. They knew their goals and what they were trying to do. And they reacted to everything because we spent the time to educate them. This is our formula. We present old school wrestling with new school talent. Logic of the 80s with guys that were born in the 80s. That wasn't so, I was only 20 years beforehand at that point in time. Everybody got fucking new music. I even had Stacy be my music fucking consultant. And everybody's music, because we could play commercial music, because who gives a fuck? It's Louisville. Nobody did it in Smoky Mountain. Nobody complained. So we would have their music fit their gimmick, their personality, what they wanted to accomplish. And I would tell them, I'd take that fucking song and play it over in your head. This is your vibe when you come out. Get with it, right? Everything had to fit because you know how obsessive I am. Any loophole in logic needed to be closed up. And especially when they started doing really stupid shit with the guys on Raw or SmackDown. Danny Davis used to call me the Weasel, because I would figure out a way to weasel out of whatever corner they had backed me up in with the way they were presenting our guys so that it wouldn't look phony in Louisville. Because my face was on that show. People knew I was the matchmaker. I was the play-by-play guy. It's my hometown. I'm out there talking to these people all the time. I was not going to have phony fucking wrestling presented in the city of Louisville, Kentucky. And for a period of about 6 years, we didn't. And, you know, they couldn't stand it that we were autonomous or independent or whatever else. They couldn't get away from us because they had nobody else that could do it until, like I said, Laurinaitis built part of what we were doing in Florida so we could have more control over it. But then they lost the guys getting the full rounded background by being specifically booked as underneath guys or middle guys or main event guys, or being able to work in front of large crowds, being able to do television specials, being able to be featured in local commercials. They took that part of it out because they didn't want a wrestling promotion to exist on its own. They wanted a school that they could not own, but control. So they got that part of it.
Well, your first experiment with the WWE Network. Have you given up?
I mean, I like no. There's plenty of stuff on there, and I like the show. It's so funny that it was like we suddenly thought of to do this. Yeah, from coming up and seeing what we've been doing for the previous 10 fucking years. And you said, do you ever think there'll be an OVW documentary? We don't have a lot of that shit on tape, but we never had anybody taking pictures at our workouts. The public was never allowed to see a training session. We didn't take pictures of guys being taught how to work because that would expose the business. We ran a fucking, one VCR just in case anybody wanted to go back and look, but you learned by doing. And as Dr. Tom said in the FCW documentary, by repetition over and over till it becomes second nature. Not only that applies to the moves in the ring, but that also applies to the way you think about the business. My guys always kayfabed in public. If they didn't, and we found out about it, they got fined. My guys never said entertainer or entertainment. They said wrestler or sport. My guys never used inside terminology on television. There was nothing. Every once in a while, something may drop or something may get through, but I supervised the post-production. Danny pushed the buttons, and I said, nah, we can't have that. So there's a lot of that stuff that just doesn't exist because we specifically did not record a lot of that stuff, because why are you going to record guys practicing? You don't do that because then you can see through it. If anybody was to see it, you record and watch it back with them, say, don't do this anymore, and then dump that fucking tape. We saved the one where Randy Orton admitted he hated wrestling, but that was a special case. But yeah, there's just, and they've already done then they'd have to go back and say, well, this other documentary, we kind of made up a lot of that shit because they'd been doing it up there for 10 years beforehand. So they're not going to do that. And they still do not own all of the OVW library. So that is now rests with Al Snow, since Danny Davis is firmly in retirement in Florida and don't give a fuck about wrestling. I felt bad for Danny. The last 3 years or so, I'd go over there every once in a while to visit him. See, after Laurinaitis we had the final blow up, and Laurinaitis says, well, how's this going to work? I said, well, you can't fire me from OVW because I own part of it. You can fire me from my consultant's position with the WWF. That's fine. But I will step aside because I didn't want Danny was getting a check from the WWF, and also OVW as an entity was getting a check at that time. Well, if OVW was getting a check from the WWF, I was going to get part of that money because I still own part of it. So I didn't want to run them all off. It cost Danny his check. I said, I'll just step back and let you do whatever the fuck it is that you do, Laurinaitis. I said, as long as you do not devalue my percentage of Ohio Valley Wrestling. Well, that happened over the next year and a half. And like I said, Heyman didn't care whether we sold any tickets. He didn't give a fuck about the spot shows. He just wanted to get out of there. He wanted to get a couple of guys up on the main roster so that he could look good in the office and they'd get him out of Louisville. The only reason he stayed long in Louisville on Tuesday nights was so he could purposely miss his plane and wouldn't have to go to Deep South on Wednesday because that thing was an abomination. And then the various other people they tried, it didn't work. So that's when, and I've told the story, Danny and I concocted a way that they might think that I had lost my ever-loving mind. And since I was on camera for TNA, their only competitor at that point, they wanted to get me out of it anyway. So they advanced Danny the money to buy me out. Then I kicked him back a nice little finder's fee out of that, which was still in 5 figures. And then they started making their plans to get the fuck out and do their own thing. And Danny started getting as much money as he could out of them until they did fuck him. And then we've told a story before, but just in the interest of completion here real quick as we're winding up, they gave him no notice in 2007. They had told him, re-sign the lease on the building for 3 years. In 2000, I believe, well, in 2006, the most recent contract we had signed with them was coming up. So they said, oh, yeah, we're fine. Sign the lease on the building. It's in Danny's name. He'd be responsible. Redo the deal with the TV station. Everything's fine. 6 months later, they come to him and said, we're giving you 2 weeks notice. We're going to move everything to Florida. It's like, what the fuck? And that would have been the majority of the crew. As a matter of fact, one time in 2006, anticipating this, we actually trademarked and filed papers and opened Derby City Wrestling, which was going to be a subsidiary to OVW, because we figured if they found a way to snatch OVW, we'll have another wrestling promotion ready to go on in Louisville. And we were discussing with the television station, we did a few TV shows, we're discussing with the station a 2-hour block, 1 hour of OVW and 1 hour of Derby City, but that didn't come to pass because we couldn't get it ready in time. Anyway, we were making backup plans. When I'd stepped back in 2005, I was still part owner of the company. I went out and started selling sponsorships. I started trying to get some revenue in. The big Wix Pizza thing, where we were getting, a few $1,000s a month, plus all the pizza we could sell and our guys in commercials and some other things like that. But as fast as I could make the money another way, our shows and our ticket sales and everything was falling off. And the only thing that was really still a major deal was the Six Flags deal. Well, it was coming up on Six Flags season. Danny had sold him another package for high 5 figures for the summer to have shows every Friday night out at their amphitheater. And in one fell swoop, Laurinaitis would have come in, and if he'd taken all the guys from Florida, or taken all the guys to Florida, it would have killed Danny's Six Flags deal, which was what was going to keep him afloat for the next few years. Until Six Flags cut the girl's leg off in the fucking, unrepaired ride, and they all got closed down. Stephen P. New should have got a hold of that one. Anyway, John Cena went to fucking Vince McMahon and said, this guy has done everything you wanted him to do, and he trained all of us, and you can't fucking fuck him like this. And got Vince to agree to send the WWE talent for the Six Flags deal through that summer, and John was one of them that came. And that's when they drew their biggest crowd that year, even in the rain, to see John Cena. So if it hadn't been for him being a stand-up guy, Laurinaitis would have fucked Danny Davis. Where I was going with this was, once that they had bought me out, then they fucked Danny, then Danny owned the whole thing, then later on, that's when he had gone through deals with TNA, and we did some Ring of Honor co-promotions when Ring of Honor was first starting its television tapings, because we needed a place to tape. But the last few years, even though he scaled back on the scale of the operations, they weren't running any Six Flags event. There was no more Six Flags. Weren't running the Gardens. Gardens was closed. It was just spot shows and the TV. He got a dedicated group of local guys that most of them weren't going to go anywhere, but they liked being in the wrestling business, and they found a steady group of fans that were into their programs, even though some of it was quite brutal to watch. The fans came and supported them, and Danny still made money. That's one thing. Danny Davis never, over the long period of time, ever lost money in the wrestling business. I've said he was a business genius. I saw him make a $3 profit on a $103 gate one night. He's the one that kept us in business and kept himself in business all that time. No matter what, he was a genius at that, and he could squeeze a nickel till the buffalo farted. But finally, over the last few years he was there, I'd go to visit him, and I'd go in his office, and he'd close the door, and the monitor that sat on his desk that showed the TV taping, he'd never turn it on. I'd say, Danny, you going to watch the show? He said, no, I come in, I do the paperwork, make sure the commission's happy, make sure the bills are paid. These guys, they're selling enough tickets to keep the doors open, but I can't watch it, or I'd hit the ring and beat the fuck out of everybody and lock the doors tomorrow morning. So for the last few years, he just didn't watch what wrestling had become, the entertainment and the bullshit. And finally, he decided, all right, I've loved this. It's been my child, but I'm ready. And Al Snow has a partner and thought he could do something with it, which he has done in the year and a half since he bought the thing from Danny. Until recently, they started doing their TV show live. They're not on as big a station in Louisville as we were at that time, but they're on a station that not only has a broadcast signal, but cable coverage. And they started doing live tapings And they did the 4th Street Live show for the 1,000th television program and had a great crowd down there. And they've got some local sponsors. And they were about to go live on one of those America One type networks just when this whole thing hit. So that's been put on hold, but it's not as big as it once was. They don't have access to the talent that we once had, but they're still keeping wrestling alive in Louisville. And OVW now, I think Danny's TV started right after Raw did. But OVW and the WWE now are the 2 longest running uninterrupted promotions and television products in America. And at one point from, what was it, 1999 until, 1999 until I left in 2005, and I think it was still another year or so. OVW, besides the WWE, was the only profitable full-time wrestling promotion with weekly television and running a full schedule of events in the United States. Ring of Honor wasn't making any money. I don't say any money. Ring of Honor was not turning a profit. TNA was not turning a profit. And practically nobody else even had a full-time schedule to speak of any event, and certainly didn't have broadcast television. So and Danny Davis's name, I think, gets mentioned twice in this show, and once out of Laurinaitis's chicken lips. But he's the reason why. I'm the reason why a developmental program got started. He's the reason why the developmental program made money, regardless of whether it was affiliated with the WWE or not.
One last question for you, because we've gone, I thought last week's episode was long. I think we beat that record.
Well, fuck, week. Nobody's got anything else to do. And besides that, I've just stopped giving a complete fuck and don't care whether anybody hears some of these stories now or not. I will find the note that I wrote and fax to Danny Davis so that he could send to the fucking office in Stamford when he had convinced them. He said, my fucking crazy ex-partner is a lunatic and is going to cause us all a bunch of problems unless I've got the money to buy him out. I started writing in longhand on both sides of the paper, and by the time I got to page 4, I was using 2 or 3 lines. It looked like a goddamn ransom note. I'll tell everything I know, and I'll make up the shit I don't if I don't get out of this shit. And they sent that fucking money down, and I got my money, and Danny got his. We worked a Memphis program on him.
Well, that could be your restraining order for 2020. I have a feeling a lot of people would love to have a copy of that. But watching the FCW documentary, at any point did you think, when watching Seth Rollins, I'm responsible for him being there? Because you're the one who talked him out of going to TNA.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but then I felt bad because I sent him to a place they kept him for 2 fucking years. It's like keeping fucking Picasso in 3rd grade art class. But until he stopped doing the things that they identified with indie wrestling, and I mean, there's plenty of things with indie wrestling that should never be seen in public. But Tyler Black wasn't doing very many of them. So I don't know what the fucking problem even was. But for a while I felt bad. I was like, fuck, I fucking said, just please don't go to TNA. Please ask for a call, make another call, do anything. And it was a delay of a week or 10 days or whatever till they called him back. But then when they sent him to Florida for the next couple of years, I was like, oh, fuck, what did I do? But then it's worked out well. But yes,